As Athens was going through its golden era, no other Greek city matched its wealth and splendor. Relying on alliances with the other cities that were a part of the Delian League, Athens had the needed foundations to expand its emerging empire. Nevertheless, there was an outstanding opponent which did not want to hand out the whole of Greece to the Athenians just like that. Its army had the most feared warriors of the ancient world, known as Spartans. In 433 BC, a peace agreement between Sparta and Athens was being abode by, which was sealed after the end of hostilities from previous years. This agreement would have to last 30 years, but the tensions between the Greek powers only kept growing. The city of Corinth, a Spartan ally, felt threatened by the growth of Athens' influence on the other territories and trade routes dominated by Corinth. The island of Corcyra, which was a Corinthian colony, was being besieged by Epidamnos, another colony of Corinth. Corcyra had one of the largest naval fleets in Greece, and so it decided to attack Epidamnos, which promptly requested the assistance of Corinth. The mother city decided to back up Epidamnos, neglecting Corcyra. The latter, seeing itself in a disadvantaged position, threatened to request the support of Athens. The Spartans had no interest in a war with such a scale at the time, and as the leader of the Peloponnesian League, Sparta forced Corinth to make concessions to Corcyra to avoid a greater conflict. But the population of Corcyra kept feeling threatened by Corinth, and so they sent emissaries to Athens. They met with Pericles and told him, "There are only 3 relevant naval fleets in Greece, yours, ours, and Corinth's. If we are dominated and if we have our fleet captured, you will have to fight against a combined strength that is greater than yours." However, Pericles knew that turning Corcyra into a member of the Delian League would be a slap in the face of the Spartans. The Athenian leader established a purely defensive pact with Corcyra. That way, the Delian League ensured that it could stand for the island just in case of aggression perpetrated by foreign aggressors. Corinth and the city of Megara launched a campaign in favor of a war against Athens. The Athenians decided to retaliate against Megara, decreeing the first economic embargo in history. Because of that, Megara's merchants no longer had access to ports of the Delian League, and neither they had access to the Agora in Athens. The economic embargo was devastating for the economy of Megara. It was the proof that the Athenian Empire was stronger and more influential than initially assumed. Sparta could no longer remain still, given the expansion of the power of Athens and its empire. The Spartans and their allies declared war against Athens. The much dreaded Spartan army moved towards Athens. Its soldiers, who were prepared to wage a war since their childhood, were eager to reach glory on the fields of battle. Sparta and their allies had declared war against Athens and its empire. This conflict was already seen as unavoidable by both sides of the clash. Therefore, both Sparta and Athens had already conducted all the preparations for the approaching war. Sparta was a military power. Its army was comprised of the most well-trained soldiers in Greece. Combining their troops with those of their allies, they formed a coalition of the Peloponnese cities that was practically undefeatable on land. However, a war not only takes place on land. The city of Athens had a respectable army, but the size and power of its navy casted a shadow on everyone else's. The Spartans marched towards the region of Attica, where the city of Athens was located. They went for a classic strategy of invading a territory. Seizing a quick victory, the Peloponnese army started to destroy the fields and rural villages that supplied the city of Athens. The strategy was to force their surrender or oblige them to fight in the open field, a situation where the Spartan troops would have a great advantage, numeric and also based on the quality of their soldiers. But Pericles anticipated that movement. And so, the rural population that lived near Athens were brought to the city along with their products and cattle, remaining within the fortifications. In previous years, large fortifications had been built, which protected the city of Athens, in addition to the Great Wall, which was a protected corridor connecting the city to the great port of Piraeus. Although besieged, the city of Athens was easily supplied with products that came from outside. The population was fed with grain from Egypt. The elites had their luxuries satisfied by merchants who imported every kind of product. So the Spartan strategy of forcing a quick surrender of Athens amounted to nothing. The siege conducted by Sparta and its allies had no effect. The Athenians kept living their normal lives behind the walls. Meanwhile, the Athenian navy tried to establish a naval blockade for the trade routes whose destination was the Peloponnesian Peninsula. Knowing that Athens would have the ability to invade their cities by sea, the Spartans and their allies split their armies and shipped many soldiers back home. They would have to fight for the city. Now, with a smaller army, the chances of launching an assault against the Athenian fortifications became almost impossible. Pericles' strategy was successful, and now time was on his side. Autumn was coming, and the cities of the Peloponnese were basically rural, so the armies had to go back home to harvest the lands, otherwise their economy would collapse. Since Athens had no more fields to take care of, given that they had been destroyed, its men were free to conduct a military incursion. Pericles had planned to take the city of Megara, located in a strategic position, separating the mainland from the Peloponnesian Peninsula. But Athens was a democracy, and the assembly ruled that such a move would cost many Athenian lives. Unable to change the ideas of the assembly on this issue, Pericles was obliged to keep his armies in a defensive stance. In the year 430 BC, a disaster took place in Athens. A plague coming from Egypt was ravaging the city's population. A third of the population was slaughtered by the disease. Athens was a tremendously crowded city, and so the epidemic spread rapidly. Many of the soldiers that the assembly decided not to sacrifice on the fields of battle ended up facing an inglorious death. If that was not enough, the plague also took the Athenian leader to the Hades, and there was no one in Athens who could have leadership skills capable of replacing him. After Pericles' death, his major opponent rose to power. His name was Cleon. Of aristocratic origin, and with outstanding oratory abilities, he convinced the people to take the war to the Spartans and their allies. In 429 BC, the Athenians had two major naval wins against the Spartan and Corinthian navies. In both battles, the Athenians were numerically inferior, but the skill and the experience of Athens' seamen made the difference. Without Pericles in command, the empire faced some instabilities. With Sparta's help, the town of Mytilene prompted an uprising which had the intention to guarantee the independence of the island of Lesbos from the empire. Athens sent troops that curbed the revolt. An enraged Cleon went to the assembly and asked for the massacre of the entire population of Mytilene for treason. However, the assembly decides to punish only the leaders of the uprising. While Athens curbed the rebellion, the city of Thebes attacked Plataea, a city allied to Athens. After the victory, the Thebans demolished the city. Cleon decided to retaliate and ready a campaign against the region Boeotia, one controlled by Thebes. Under the command of General Nicias, the Athenian army defeated an army made of Thebans and soldiers of the city of Tanagra. In the meantime, General Demosthenes started the campaign on Aetolia. Among the objectives of the campaign was the intent to pacify the Aetolian region, strengthening its allies, and subsequently opening a second front against Thebes. But the unexpected defeat of Demosthenes forced Nicias and his troops to return to Athens, forfeiting the attack on Thebes. With Demosthenes defeated, the Peloponnesian League decided to attack Athens' allies in the region. General Demosthenes was sent again to stand for their allies. But this time, he was successful, defeating Sparta and its allies in the Battle of Pe and Idomene. The Spartan army invaded the island of Corcyra, an Athenian ally, forcing the Athenian leaders to send its navy under the command of Demosthenes to liberate the island. However, a storm forced the Athenian general to harbor his ships on the coast of the Peloponnese, near the town of Pylos. The information that the Athenians were lodged in Spartan territory forced both the navy and the army of Sparta to act. Demosthenes had a small contingent of only 5 vessels, relying on 90 hoplites and 600 sailors. The general used 3 of the ships to establish a small fort, and aware of the approximation of the Spartans, sent 2 other ships in search of reinforcements. The Spartan navy, with approximately 60 ships, emerged on the horizon. Led by the brilliant general Brasidas, the Spartans launched an attack by sea and land against the Athenian fortification. Brasidas landed with his troops on the beach and began to assault the fortification, but the Athenian defenses repelled the continuous waves of Spartan attacks. In one of these attacks, the general Brasidas, who was fighting on the vanguard, was seriously wounded and taken away from the field of battle. The Spartans decided to besiege the Athenian fort and readied sieging machinery to invade the fortification. But the Athenian fleet appeared. Responding to the SOS of Demosthenes, the 50 Greek ships fought the Spartan navy in a bloody battle. The loss of lives on both sides was heavy, but the Athenian technique in naval clashes prevailed once more. The Spartan fleet suffered a heavy defeat, losing about 1/3 of their vessels and having several others deeply damaged. The Spartan troops that were sieging the fort saw their situation changing dramatically. Demosthenes and his men were rescued, and now 440 Spartan elite soldiers were surrounded by the Athenian navy on the island of Sphacteria. If Leonidas and his 300 Spartans were able to hold the army of Xerxes, 440 hoplite Spartans ready to sacrifice their lives for Sparta could be a nightmare. After the defeat of the Spartan navy in the Battle of Pylos, 440 Spartans were surrounded by the Athenian navy on the island of Sphacteria. The general, Demosthenes, was heading the siege of the Spartans after the negotiations for the Spartan surrender had failed. The general decided to force the Spartan soldiers to surrender due to hunger and lack of supplies. Demosthenes had more than double the number of hoplite Spartans, but the Spartan phalanx was comprised of elite soldiers, and that was enough to cause fear to any general. The strategy to win the Spartans by hunger was ruined, given that swimmers managed to pierce the Athenian blockade, taking supplies to the soldiers. The Athenian leader, Cleon, challenged to defeat the Spartans, set sail towards the island, taking reinforcements to fight the Spartans. Cleon and Demosthenes landed on the island of Sphacteria. Cleon brought archers and peltasts with him, who were light infantry because they did not have large shields and armor, and so they could move with greater ease. The Athenians marched towards the Spartans, and their armies were now facing each other. The Spartans hesitated to attack the Athenian hoplites, fearing to be flanked by light infantry. The Spartan phalanx started to be punished by Athenian projectiles, a barrage of arrows, darts, and stones thrown by the slings. The peltasts approached the enemy phalanx and threw their darts at a short distance. When the Spartans attempted to attack them, they fled and then returned to shoot more darts. The Spartan commander was killed, and the second in line was seriously wounded. The Spartans decided to retreat to an ancient ruin and made a fortification out of it. There, they kept resisting until the moment they found themselves surrounded. Without any hope of achieving victory, the Spartans decided to drop their weapons and surrender. The news of the Spartans' surrender shocked the Greek world. Never before the Spartans had surrendered and taken as prisoners. They had always resisted until death. From the 440 Spartan soldiers who fought in the battle, 292 were made prisoners, among which 120 were the offspring of the noblest Spartan families. After such humiliation, Sparta presented a peace proposal to Athens in exchange for Spartan prisoners. The Athenian leader Cleon refused the peace proposal and threatened to kill all prisoners if Sparta dared to invade the region of Attica. This way, the Athenian population could cultivate again the fields around the city. Cleon triumphantly went back to Athens and started to be idolized as a hero of the people. The moment was favorable to the Delian League, which started to strengthen itself to expand the boundaries of the empire. Athens had managed to humiliate Sparta in the battles of Pylos and Sphacteria. 292 Spartan hoplites were made prisoners, among them several soldiers, heirs of the noblest Spartan families. Athens, perceiving the good moment, prepared itself to expand its empire. The city of Delium, subordinated to Thebes, the enemy of Athens, decided to quit the Peloponnesian League and join the Delian League led by Athens. But, aware that Thebes would not accept such a betrayal, they request the help of Athens to defend the city. Athens sent its army to defend the city of Delium, and as expected, Thebes sent its army to reconquer it. Under the command of General Pagondas, the Theban army defeated the Athenians, making use of innovative strategies in the battlefield. This Athenian defeat was extremely motivating for cities of the Peloponnese. They realized that the war, which looked like the lost cause, was not decided yet. Sparta took advantage of the momentary weakness of Athens and decided to attack. However, the Spartans could not attack the region of Attica, since all the Spartan prisoners could be executed. So, they decided to attack the Athenian colony of Amphipolis in Thrace. After sieging the city, the Spartan general Brasidas requested its surrender to avoid a bloodbath, while guaranteeing a safe conduct for those who wanted to leave the city. The city decided to surrender to the Spartans. Athens, realizing the risk of having Brasidas conquering several Athenian colonies without offering much resistance, sent its army to fight them under the command of Cleon, who was regarded as a hero after having defeated the Spartans at Sphacteria. After reconquering some cities taken by the Spartans, Cleon decided to attack the army of Brasidas. The Athenians docked near the city of Amphipolis and waited for the arrival of reinforcements before launching their attack. Brasidas noted that a victory on the battlefield would be virtually impossible if the Athenians managed to get reinforcements. Therefore, he decided to attack Cleon. The unexpected attack met a completely disorganized Athenian army. General Brasidas was fatally wounded during the attack, but still managed to survive long enough to witness the overwhelming victory of Sparta against the Athenian army. The Athenian troops endured several casualties. Among the dead was General Cleon, who perished on the battlefield. The victory of Sparta was decisive. The war between Sparta and Athens had been an ongoing conflict for more than 10 years, and both sides were already quite worn and had no willingness to continue the fight. The Athenian general Nicias and the interim king Pleistouanax of Sparta established a peace agreement. The restitution of all territories conquered during the war was one of its terms. Also, the liberation of Spartan prisoners and the free movement of pilgrims to access the holy places of the Greek world. This agreement was planned to last for 50 years and became known as the Peace of Nicias. However, Thebes and Corinth refused to take part in such treaty, and thus the tensions between the Greek city-states remained. Nonetheless, despite the losses, Athens still had a powerful navy, which was a dominating force in the Aegean Sea. The war was not lost yet. After the death of the Spartan general Brasidas and the Athenian leader Cleon, a peace treaty between the two cities was signed. This agreement was planned to last for 50 years. But the tensions between the Delian League and the Peloponnesian alliance forced it to only last 6. The Athenian leader Alcibiades, with popular support, planned a major campaign to defeat Sparta once and for all. The city-state of Argos, a rival town of Sparta, joined Athens. With its new ally, the Delian League had to attack its enemies of the Peloponnese in its own territory. But the king Aegeus II of Sparta mobilized his army and defeated the combined forces of Argos and Athens in the Battle of Mantinea. This victory strengthened the Spartan morale and confirmed the superiority of their armies in land battles. Despite the defeat, the Athenians were concatenating an ambitious campaign to dominate the Greek colonies in Magna Graecia, where modern Italy is located. and conquer the wealthy city of Syracusa in Sicily. If they managed to dominate the region, the cities of the Peloponnese would suffer from the shortages of supplies, and Athens would be practically invincible. However, the plan was too risky, even with popular support. The Athenian leadership had disagreements among themselves. A conspiracy puts an end to the leader Alcibiades for a sacrilege committed against the gods. In exile, he found refuge in Sparta, where he revealed the plans of the Athenian Expedition in Sicily. And this was fatal to what Athens had been planning. Sparta sent the general Gylippus to train the Syracusan army so that they would be ready to face the approaching war. The Delian League sent a large army under the command of General Nicias to conquer the region. In the beginning stages, the Athenians found little to no resistance, and conquered some cities. Syracusa sent its army to face the Athenians, but ended up being defeated and took shelter inside the Syracusan walls. Nicias unleashed a siege of the powerful city-state. Meanwhile, Sparta sent some reinforcements to Syracusa and also an enormous amount of money so that the city could hire mercenaries and found allies. General Nicias planned to build walls around the city to isolate it, but the population of Syracuse also built walls to prevent a sieging situation. Nicias realized that the siege would fail, and, using messengers, he called for an end to the campaign. However, the Athenian leaders believed that, with shipments of reinforcements, victory would be a reality, and they sent the famous general Demosthenes and his army. In the meantime, Syracuse managed to gather allies, and Nicias had to endure some defeats. The reinforcements of Demosthenes arrived. They attempted an assault against the city walls, but were repelled. Demosthenes and Nicias realized the difficulty of the situation, but dreaded the probability of ending up as losers. When they were about to go home, a lunar eclipse took place, and given their superstition, they believed it was a good sign. They believed that the money of Syracuse was coming to an end, and without it, its allies would abandon them, and so they decided to continue the siege. However, the Athenians were surprised by a powerful attack against their navy, which was docked at the port. Syracuse and its allies encircled the Athenian navy. Without a way out, it was totally decimated. The land troops were also in a desperate situation. Without its navy, how could they go home? The armies decided to abandon the siege and look for a new escape route. The Athenian troops were persecuted by their enemies and finally defeated. The number of casualties was high. More than 7,000 soldiers were captured and sold as slaves. In turn, the fate of the generals Nicias and Demosthenes was no better. Both were executed under the order of the Spartan general Gylippus, the hero of Syracuse. All the Athenian expeditionary force was destroyed. The defeat was overwhelming. In Athens, the generals considered the loss of 10,000 soldiers something regrettable, but the loss of 30,000 experienced sailors was regarded as catastrophic. After this great defeat, several members quit the Delian League, and cities that were neutral in the conflict, realizing the frailty of Athens, joined Sparta. Athens had suffered a major defeat in the Sicilian campaign. Most of its army and navy had been destroyed. Athens had suffered a major defeat in the Sicilian campaign. Most of its army and navy had been destroyed. On top of that, 2 of their best generals were executed. The routes of supply of grain from Egypt and Sicily were blocked by the Spartans, and several cities were leaving the empire. The Spartan king Agis commanded the blockade of silver mines controlled by Athens. With this, the Spartans cut one of the major sources of wealth from the Athenian Empire. Despite its perilous position, Athens worked hard to reinforce its navy and regain control of the Aegean Sea. The Athenian leadership decided to bring back the general Alcibiades, who was in exile, and gave him command of the navy. The Athenian naval forces had several victories over the Spartans and succeeded in liberating the routes of supply, while also retaking control of the seas. The Spartans continued to have victories in land battles, but they knew that the Athenian defeat of the sea was imperative. Otherwise, the war would last several years. Therefore, the Spartans relied on their historical enemies, the Persian Empire, and sealed a deal in which the Persians would offer financial resources and naval support to defeat the Athenian navy. In contrast, the Persians could regain the Greek colonies in Asia Minor and annex them to the Persian Empire. The Athenian navy continued to fight bravely, managing to have some important victories, but under the command of the Spartan general Lysander, the Spartan navy, funded with Persian gold, destroyed the Athenian counterpart. Without its navy, the city of Athens was besieged by land and sea, and due to the famine, the Athenians capitulated and signed the terms of their surrender. General Lysander imposed the destruction of the fortifications which protected the city of Athens. The Athenian navy would have to be drastically reduced, and a large sum would be paid by Athens as war compensation. Also, the Delian League was dissolved, and the democratic government of Athens was replaced by an oligarchic government. Sparta was now the predominant power in Greece. No other city could match the powerful city in the Peloponnese. Sparta was the winner of the Peloponnesian War. However, the rule of the Spartan power, having its military power as the basis, fostered the discontent of the Greek city-states, and new tensions spread throughout Greece.